Aditya, and in this series, I talk to some exceptional graduates of TU Delft to understand the hype and the fuss behind a master thesis. Is it really though? It does not matter in which phase of thesis you're in currently, we have something in store for all of you. From talking about the optimum number of coffees to be consumed, to figuring out a thesis topic, or maybe handling your social life, we find out from the best. Let's talk the talk, or shall I say, let's talk thesis.
Uh, Hello, everyone. I am Tapasya Mukkamala, and I am a master's. I did my master's in landscape architecture at the Department of Urbanism, Faculty of Architecture and Built Environment. And prior to that, I did my bachelor's in India in architecture and worked as an urban designer for 2 years before I moved to Netherlands. And currently, I am working as a landscape architect and urban designer at a design firm called Stijlgroep in Rotterdam. And it's been 6 months that I joined, so I'm fresh out of the oven, I would say. And I graduated in 2020, so the first batch to have graduated in the pandemic. So I hope what I share is something that you could relate to a certain extent. Yes. So for this is completely my experience and how I took my thesis as a journey. I would rather compare it, what do you say, to a journey that you would take in a ship in an ocean, right? You are in the ship, there's an ocean and sea of knowledge, that you would say. So uh, I started planning my thesis at least a few months into my third quarter, I would say, because one thing in landscape architecture is that it's a very big umbrella of themes that are there under the term of landscape architecture. And most of us who come from India predominantly just have a bachelor's in architecture. Few would luckily would have done some work in the area of specialization that they have chosen for their masters, but most of us would have just done work in architecture field. So it can be quite overwhelming when you come here and then there's this whole Pandora's box of all these different topics and themes and that relate to that specific course. So it's always easier, or rather important, if you start it a little ahead in time, so you know what are your few areas of interest where you would want to pursue your thesis. Because then if you don't have experience, then thesis becomes like this anchor point for you for your work in future or for your research in future. So it's very important that you invest that time in knowing what you exactly want to do, plan it quite ahead in time, and maybe take courses that will give you better insights on these themes. And then it would become easier for you to pick a topic that you would want to work ahead in time. And especially in landscape or in urbanism, in landscape especially, we were asked to submit our basic proposal before we left for our summer holidays, that is in the end of our fourth quarter. So we had to be sure in what lab we wanted to choose and what would be a general idea on how our thesis would go ahead before we even begun our second year. So I think if that is a situation, then it's always good to work ahead in time, and that's what I did. So over the courses that I took and all the semesters that I've done, I realized that my area of interest would be something like urban river deltas, where how I can use landscape design to address the theme of resilience within urban systems. So having understood that that's my area of interest ahead in time helped me eventually in my own pace develop my thesis, and I didn't have to hurry at that point when I had a deadline to actually submit my framework. So then my fascination and motivation would then have a complete idea of at least what I would want to do ahead in time. So I think it's very important you start it quite before you even start your thesis on. So yeah. So as I mentioned to you before, a thesis in architecture faculty is a year-long thesis. You have to be really prepared to like take up that whole year, not to lose focus. Even if there are hurdles, you have to maintain that focus and do so. If you choose a theme that you don't like, or if you choose a professor whom you cannot work with, then the whole year would be full of ups and downs, and sometimes it can be really hard. So if you will be given before you have to choose your topic, you will be given a time to think of. They will give you what all labs are there, who all professors are there in which graduation lab. They give all the information that you might need a little ahead in time. So just like I said, mentioned before, if you are already clear on at least the theme that you want to choose, then you can directly start inquiring with the professors within the labs to know further about the lab, and then see if you will fit in into it or not. Similarly, since also there is a lab and then you have limited number of professors within that, you will then have to know which professor you can work with, because that eventually becomes very important over the long course on how the professor can mold or help you mold your thesis, and how he or she would guide your research. So it's always good to see long term, see what you would want to achieve at the end, and see if that particular lab, graduation lab, fits in into your theme of interest. That's how you choose your lab. And then secondly, then that's when your professors come in. So within the lab, who all are there, you ask them, you mail them, saying if they are also in line with what your school of thought is, if they could help you in molding your thesis and what you want it to be like. So it's good to first think of all of it and then approach a professor or choose a lab. And when it comes to site, since most of our designs are very site specific most of the time, so everybody has a different take on what site they would want to choose. Few would choose a site maybe in their home country, which is closer to their comfort zone, so they can work more better on it. Few people usually choose the same site that is there within your site, within your graduation lab. So there are few graduation labs that already come with a fixed site, saying that this is where the research is happening. So you already know where you have to work, and then you figure out which part of that research you would want to contribute to. And then thirdly, you can also pick up sites that would help you further proceed your research after you graduate. Maybe see where all the current companies work, what are the cities or areas where they're looking in. And that could also be a take towards which you want to pick up a site. And last but not the least, data is very important. So when you are deriving your problem statement or research objectives, you need to back it up with a lot of information, facts, and data. So it's always good, because you don't have a lot of time to do everything. It's always good to pick a site where you have already sufficient open access data available for you to work on. So it makes your life easier, because I know people who got stuck or even changed their site because there wasn't enough data available for them to work in the later phase. So if you don't want to be in that hassle, then it's always better to prepare, do a little bit of research on it right before you begin your thesis. Yeah, so one good thing, I don't know if it's a good thing or bad thing, but I consider it good, is that in architecture, our thesis structure is at least largely planned. So we have 5 major presentations, in which 2 are critical. That's where you have your go, no go with thing. So you have 5 such presentations that happen. And in general, we are given a comprehensive thesis guide, which states what they would in general, on a broader perspective, want you to present in each of these presentations. So that course is kind of set for you, so you know, okay, when it's your P2, you have to present your larger framework, your direction in which you want to work your thesis on, maybe your methodology, and then your theories that you would want to use, and then backed with analysis saying, okay, this is the reason why I want to do this project. So these are certain things you will have to present in your P2, which is at least which happens in January, around January, so after your Christmas break. So by then you do certain research, you have your framework a little prepared, that gives you an idea on which direction your thesis is going. But after that happens is something I observed, which also happened with me and which also happened with a lot of people, is you get stuck. Sometimes you get a lot of information, read a lot of papers, you you search for a lot of case studies, and it's quite confusing, because in general world has a lot of problems, and as designers we have this inbuilt thing that we would want to solve everything that is there around us. So that happens to all of us. Even in our thesis, there will be multiple things that will interest you. Even after developing a framework, there will be an instance where you'll be thinking if that framework is right or not. So at that point, what my professor suggested me was to stop that research completely, not to go any more ahead in that stage, and start doing the design. So since you already know, you already kind of choose which sites you want to focus on in your P2, you can take that as a base and already start designing with all that knowledge you have. And then you work backwards. Like, you start designing and then you overlay that design with all those different data you have, the maps you have, and then you develop these no regret zones, and then you see on which data would fine tune your design further, or your research, or your strategies further. And I think that's how you can convince your professor in certain ways, saying, okay, I have this research, I did this design, and then you show him this design and say that, okay, these are the inputs that you have used in order to come up with this conclusion. And then he or she would give you a suggestion on how it can be improved. So it's a process, and that happens till you even present your final presentation, because design is very subjective and it can change anytime. So if you ask me to look back at my thesis right now, I would find 110 problems with it. I would want to design it completely different. So it's a process, but you will have to find that balance between when to stop the research and when to start the design, and then combine them, work on both sides and combine them to create this proper, strong storyline that is in line with your research objectives that you have formed before. So yeah, I I cannot explain how important it is to have a professor who has similar, not same, you cannot have same school of thoughts, but similar school of thoughts, who is inclined or interested in the same area you are working in. When that happens, it is easy to communicate at different levels. And secondly, I would advise is, since I've been stressing this since beginning, if you start thinking of your thesis from a little earlier than you're supposed to, it will help you have mental notes on which professor you can work on, whom to approach. And if you get an idea way before the time where you have to you have to submit your initial fascination, you can reach out to your professors, discuss with them, saying if they want to work with you or not, if they can help you guide your research or not. So it is very important to already make it clear with your professor. So even after you select them, it's good to sit with them and tell your positives and negatives, where you think you have strengths, where you think that you might need help, so they understand whom they are dealing with. And secondly, it's always a two-way thing. You have to be proactive enough to organize meetings, schedule meetings with them quite often. I would say at least once a week, because they're so busy. They have so many people they have to mentor. So sometimes if you don't give them shorter meeting times, they will forget what research you have done, what you have done so far. So then it becomes difficult. So if you show them after like 4 or 5 weeks suddenly some design, and you have developed it so much that they've forgotten what you've done previously, then they would obviously criticize you to a point where you will be confused, they will be confused. But if you take regular meeting appointments with them and show them your design constantly, keep them updated with what work you're doing constantly, the criticism then gets what do you say, it gets smaller. Like every meeting you get certain criticism, then you can take it step by step rather than having it as a bomb on your head. So communication is very important. And if if a professor is too busy to communicate on email, it's always good that you go ask if they're okay, if you can communicate with them on phone or something. It makes it really easy in that sense. So that rapport is very important, and if that is developed, they would really help you, guide you, and also sometimes personally motivate you. For me, instance, when after our P2 was somewhere after our P2 was when the lockdown started, and we were all confused. We were in design stage. For me personally, I wanted to access the library, read books, and it wasn't just not possible. But it was really easy for me to go communicate with my professor, because we kind of already had this understanding. We already ensured that this is how our thesis, how we would meet, and this is how we would discuss. So I kind of had this comfortable relation build with him. So I could ask him saying, see, I have this trouble, I am unable to access the library. And he was so sweet that he actually got those books for me. He scanned them and he sent me the images so that I can work on it further. So having that relation will really help and motivate you to work much better. And even at the end, it will give you a result that you are satisfied with. And you can also take help of them later to build your career or to work forward to your research, because they have seen you for 8 months. So they'll be the best advisors, they will be the best recommenders for you later ahead in time as well. Yeah, it depends on, again, which theme you are choosing, which lab you're choosing. If it's very core landscape architecture, you don't have to. But if you, for instance, looking at regional scale, in my case, I was looking at a city level and on infrastructure, which is something I might not, as a designer, have enough idea about. So I chose my second mentor from Urbanism. Most of us do that. So she gave a different perspective for my approach. And also, I did an annotation as a part of my thesis in infrastructure environmental design, which was also an elective I took in fourth quarter. So I attended a lot of presentations by this lab called Delta Futures Lab, where professors from civil engineering, TPM, and architecture present you about how river systems work, the engineering side of it. And it gave me a lot of information on how my design can then be integrated with these systems, with these complex layers that are already in place. So it is helpful. It gives you a broader perspective, and it also gives you, you'll be able to check if your design is actually viable or feasible. But it again completely depends on what lab you have chosen, what is your area of interest, and if you really need a third person's opinion, or if someone within landscape or within the same field could give you a better idea. So yeah. Uh, I cannot even compare my master thesis with bachelor's because I did my bachelor's in architecture. Uh, Maybe it's only me because I have completely disintegrated from architecture and I moved out and started focusing on a regional scale. But my thesis in architecture and in landscape were very different. Architecture was more on spatial yeah, experience, or it was very spatial in nature, whereas my master thesis was more on tackling the current problems of flooding, or how do you manage natural systems, water systems within urban systems, or within an urban city, urban area. So there are two drastically different. No, they're quite different. But master thesis had to be more scientific, more research, so I had to kind of be very sure on what kind of information I am providing and what kind of information I'm using. It's a lot more strict in that way, whereas in bachelor's, for me, it was a little more lenient, and it was, at least for me, it wasn't quite diverse. That I just used what I learned in the last 5 years in architecture to develop my thesis in bachelor's, whereas in landscape, it was a little more different experience, a different scale altogether. So I cannot compare them. But yeah, thesis and master's was a little more technical, and I had to put in a little extra work to get that right. I think in general, all of us are very ambitious. We've moved out of our country, came thousands of miles away. So in principle, everybody is very ambitious. But I personally think each of us have a certain l- level of ability to do something. It's not that one is inferior to others. It's just that there is a certain way that maybe one person can do a day's worth of work in just 2 hours, whereas another person has to use the entire day to work for the same amount. So it's very important to set realistic goals. So, and second, realistic goals right from the beginning when you start your thesis. It's always good to aim a little higher than what you can possibly do, because then you will go till that extent at least to finish a little bit more than what you're capable of. But you shouldn't really stress yourself to a point where you start losing the focus or the direction in which you are going. And secondly, in architecture, what happens is our visual language is very important. The way we draw, the way we present our drawings, and things like that is very, very important. And sometimes not everybody is at par in that thing. So when you have lab meetings, you present each other your drawings, right? Sometimes it can be intimidating for you to see some amazing, beautiful drawings which are conveying things much better, but then you will be then sitting and just changing your drawings on drawings, which is not required. So I think one has to be focused in the path that they are going, even if they are intimidated by other people. I think that they shouldn't let that affect the work that they're doing. And for people who want a cum laude, I think they will know that they would want it even before they start the thesis. So if you are focused, it is actually not that difficult to get a cum laude. I don't know how important it is for you in later time in life. Maybe for a PhD or research, if you would want to do, there will be certain times where they would need a really good student, academically excellent student. But apart from that, I don't see anywhere they would see if you're a cum laude or not. But if you really think that would help you further in your life ahead, it's good to have. Similarly with honors. So if you really want, if you think honors could be something that would be useful for you to do later in life, or even for your thesis, then you can do it. But if it's too much of pressure on you, then I would suggest not to even take it. So yeah, it is different for every individual. So we just have to be constantly focusing only on our thesis and not just get overwhelmed with everything that's happening around us. So yeah, that's exactly I would want to tell people. End of the day, finishing your thesis to a point where you are happy of the result that you've got is more important than anything else. So yeah. I really wanted to compare my entire thesis journey as a journey that I would take in a ship. So to be, every thesis is something like that. So for instance, right from the beginning, you are asked to submit your proposal. So proposal basically becomes your ship, right? The framework that you use in taking your the fascination that you would use to take forward in your journey. So if you don't start thinking about it ahead in time, it gets very difficult for you to build that ship at the end. To procure, it needs procurement of materials, procurement of a lot of things to build one ship. So if you don't start it from before, it gets really difficult for you to then start putting in things together. And similarly, the topic you choose or the professors you choose then become the ingredients. So professors would then be the crew of your ship, who would support you in this journey and who would guide you through all those obstacles that come. And similarly, the site and the rest of the things become these other extra, what do you say, materials you take with to sustain through all that ocean, through that journey that you take in an ocean. So it's always important to have your foundation right. So you start off your journey properly, then it keeps you prepared to your entire trip in the ocean. Whether there's a storm hitting you or whether there's one iceberg, you would still figure out your way out, because you have this smooth sailing team of people who will support you, and also the necessary what do you say, food or anything else that will keep you will be enough to make you sustain that entire process. So I think as a person, as a person, we often are very conscious. We prepare quite ahead in time when we go on a journey. So similarly, for a thesis, it's always important to be very well prepared from the beginning. So the foundation is very important. The beginning part of your journey, the preparation for your journey is very important. So yeah, I hope everybody relates to the struggles that all of us have faced. And since you see, most of us are quite happy and alive. So don't put yourself to such a strain that you want to give up at one point. So enjoy your thesis, enjoy the process, and enjoy the journey with everybody. So yeah, that's it.